Late today, congressional Democrats and their coveted 3 Republican partners, 3 in total, announced that they made a deal to pass a plan to hopefully save the economy. Their press conference today at times seemed like a sort of economic stimulus compromise awards show. The Stimmies. They did not thank their agents, their third-grade teachers, or the academy. But the awards show echoes were actually a little bit jarring.
I want to thank all of my colleagues who have worked so hard.
It could not have been done without her guidance and leadership. That's the Speaker of the House.
So I'm very pleased to have been a part of this.
I was proud to work with this group, proud to be part of it.
To all of my colleagues here, I say thank you for the experience.
Yes, it's not just a ginormous piece of legislation. It's also a heartwarming story that shows the triumph of teamwork over adversity. 2 thumbs up, Congress. Americans who believe in macroeconomics 101 are glad to hear that there is a stimulus deal, a deal that has enough support to pass, to pump some money into the demand side of supply and demand to start getting the economy to work again. 2 thumbs up, right? That said, looking at what's actually in the compromise, what's actually in the bill, makes my thumbs feel slightly less enthusiastic about what happened today in Washington. For starters, the stimulus got smaller in the compromise. The House bill was $820 billion, the Senate bill was $838 billion, and the compromise was down to $789. How is that a compromise? The math doesn't work. Spending is the point of the stimulus. The economy's bad because no one's buying anything. There's no demand in the supply and demand. So the way stimulus works is by buying stuff, right? The CBO says there's about a $2 trillion hole in demand in the economy. Spending $800 billion to fill a $2 trillion hole was probably not a big enough of a plan anyway. And now the compromise has made it even smaller? Thumbs down. Which much-needed billions did they cut from this? Well, they cut $35 billion in proposed and desperately needed aid to the states. That's to keep states from laying people off and cutting public services, things that will make the economy even worse. If you throw a dart at a U.S. map today, chances are you will hit a state with a deficit in the billions of dollars. The compromise also cuts $16 billion in school construction funds, one of President Obama's priorities. That is a line item that is essentially pure economic stimulus. If the point is to stimulate the economy, there are no conceivable grounds on which any rational policymaker could argue that reducing the amount of school construction money would make a stimulus plan better. So why did the plan get worse? Well, at least there is a passable stimulus. A bill exists. But does what just got agreed to actually have enough juice left in it after its trip through the ringer of congressional compromise to really save the economy? I'm not sure. And I'm not an expert on these things, so I need to be talked down. Joining us now is Jeffrey Sachs, who is one of the most famous economists in the world. He directs the Earth Institute at Columbia University. He advises the United Nations. Dr. Sachs, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
Can you talk me down about my big worry about the economic stimulus? Is it big enough?
Well, your worry is right. No matter what they were going to do, we're going to have a very tough year, and it's actually going to be a tough 2 or 3 years. If we went the whole way to try to offset the collapse of the housing sector and the collapse of consumption, we'd have a hole in the budget that we'd also have to take a decade to repair. That's the problem. We're going to have a budget deficit this year of probably $1.4 trillion with this stimulus and with what was already there before. That's starting to get up to real numbers. And if we went bigger and bigger, we might have a few more jobs in the short term and have a massive fiscal hole that would also really cripple us for the long term. And that's the problem that we face. There is no perfect solution to the mess that we're in right now. That's the hard point. No one has the tools to solve this problem without a lot of pain.
That's why it's so important, though, that what we do spend on stimulus is really stimulative. It really has the kind of multiplier effect that we're looking for, right?
Well, that's for sure true. And what's odd is, we have a hole in the budget that's already $1 trillion wide, which is unbelievable. I mean, we've never had this before in our history. But there's this drive to cut taxes, cut taxes. Now, there are 2 things wrong with that. One, we can't afford it. And the second is we know from experience that since people are going to say, well, those tax cuts aren't going to last, that's going to be very temporary, they're going to raise my taxes later on, the tax cuts are going to be saved rather than spent.
Right.
So there are about $350 billion in this roughly $800 billion stimulus that doesn't have much stimulus. And at the same time, the Senate, these three senators who made the so-called compromise, just turned some nasty dials where the money was really needed by the poor, really needed by the states and cities, really needed by the schools, and they cut that to raise the taxes, which are ineffective and a less fair part of the whole thing. So it's a little weird, actually.
If you took the tax cuts out, if you dialed back up the aid to states and cities, you dialed back up the school construction funding, you've also argued specifically that in this stimulus, we ought to be directing rescue money specifically to health care coverage for uninsured people. Why is that so economically important?
Well, first of all, it's desperately needed. Yeah. So it's not just stimulus, it's what kind of society we have. And if we're leaving desperately poor and ill people without access to health care, it's pretty discouraging what kind of place we're living and trying to solve. So one thing is, what are we actually doing with the money? Second thing is, if you want to give confidence back to people, tell them that they're not going to fall through right through the floor of the disaster right now. And so give them a base, some confidence. We're not going to leave people to suffer massively to their desperation. And this bill doesn't quite do it. I know that President Obama wants to do it. He compromised a lot away on this. I think it's a little bit shocking that we have the shape of this. But what you said is also true. We have a bill. It's the president's leadership that got us here, and we ought to be thankful for at least that.
One last question. You have been instrumental in the Global AIDS Fund. When we see these bankers on Capitol Hill talking today about having used billions of taxpayer dollars for bonuses to people who are already very rich, is that a teachable moment, do you think, about the value of countries spending public resources on rich people versus on poor people?
What Merrill took in bonuses is about what the U.S. gives for all of its help to the world's poorest people and Africa. And they took that, they just grabbed that in a moment. So now we have a shortfall for AIDS, TB, and malaria. That's millions of deaths, life and death at stake. And these bonuses, that's where we got to go. And I want the administration to say, come on, that's the money. I don't want them to say we have no more money for dying people. We know where the money is. Yeah. Let's go get it and let's back. Absolutely come on. Back.
Jeffrey Sachs, it is a real pleasure to meet you and to have you on the show. Thank you for coming in.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, sir. Jeffrey Sachs is the director of the Earth Institute at Columbia University.